All right. Now you should be able to see everyone. All right, so we're going to move into the panel. If anyone has questions for our panelists, please put them in chat and we'll get to them later. All right, so our first question is, how do you ensure that accessibility is integrated from the very beginning of the design and development lifecycle for all digital products, services, and instructional materials?
I would say for me, the biggest thing is training, and that's something that I try to reinforce as often as possible. I think there are a lot of accessibility checkers and features within a lot of the programs that we use, such as like Google Slides and things like that. But a lot of people don't know how to use them. So I think it's really important to encourage people to find training and to, if you are familiar with how to use those tools, to offer as much training as possible.
All right, Shireen.
I was going to say that as with everything, it is much easier that from the beginning to be thinking about accessibility rather than that being an afterthought. So I give a lot of talks to like engineering and CS students, and this is something I always encourage that when you are creating something, to think of accessibility from the beginning rather than at the end. So, for example, if any of you are, future innovators or creating products or business ideas, to really center that as part of your development rather than because it's much easier to do it from the bottom up rather than to have to deconstruct something to add the accessibility features. In addition to that, I would say that tagging on to what Paris was saying is that now there are so many incredible digital tools out there that, when we're vetting like PDF files or, alt text, which would be on pictures, for example. I'm not sure if everyone here knows what alt text is. If you don't, all right, I'll just go ahead and give a quick explanation. So, say that you're on Instagram or you're on social media and you're going to post a picture, or say that you're building a website and you're going to upload images. So, if I am a blind or low vision person, how do I know what those images are? Okay, say that my screen reader is compatible with the way you formatted your website or the post that you created, that the screen reader can actually read out all the words and things. But when it comes to the image, the screen reader doesn't will not automatically decipher what the image is. So you would manually, and actually this would be a good experiment for all of you, that if you are going to post something on Instagram, for example, they have three ellipses that you can click on and you can add alt text description. So say that we were to do a screenshot of this webinar right now. An example of an alt text would be upper left side, Parissa, Paris Coleman, sorry, Paris. On the upper right side is Shireen Hafeez. Lower left would be Caroline. Lower right would be Laura. Um, so that's just like an example. And you can go deeper into what those descriptions are. So you could say Shireen, upper right side, middle-aged South Asian woman, with medium length hair. So they don't have to be super descriptive, but it's because, you have to remember that like, it doesn't require that much. Another good practice is, so say for example, you do have audience members who are low vision or blind. So we would have started this webinar, for example, saying, "Hi, I'm Shireen Hafeez. I'm a middle-aged South Asian woman with medium brown hair. I'm wearing a black shirt." Like, and So when we talk about accessibility, there are many different nuances with how that approach would be taken. I think it's always good to understand that you're never going to have everything perfect, but the more knowledge you can have of the society that you are trying to reach, helps raise your consciousness of like simple things that, that could optimize that experience. But I want to hear from Laura.
Yeah, so the first thing I was thinking about was I rarely am brought in at the beginning. The the sentence Caroline said is usually all that's said is like you should do this, and that's all that's usually said in trainings. They don't really say how. So one of the things actually our former marketing guy suggested was our center has te PowerPoint templates. And so we went through, remediated all of it, made sure it was all accessible. And then there's a slide at the end that shows people how to run the accessibility checker again in case they don't know or they forgot. It also has a reminder like, please run the accessibility checker. And so even though that was remediation, it this time set us from the beginning of, okay, we reshared the slides. We knew they were accessible. There were reminders and directions at the end. So if you reuse it, just leave them there. I use it as an example a lot in my trainings, but 80% of my work is not at the beginning. It's at the middle, the end, the remediation phase. So if you can help someone start again, like those PowerPoints, like, hey, let's redo this and then let's use this out. I think that was a great idea he had.
Those were some great responses. I really like seeing y'all all talk about from the beginning to the end, how the accessibility process goes. So next question, how are the principles of universal design for learning or similar frameworks applied in the creation of digital tools, courses, and educational content to meet the needs of a diverse range of users and learners?
I would say like that, when you make an experience better for one person online, it's going to be better for everyone. Examples could include those flashing lights. So the WCAG guidelines are very strict about flashing lights. So I was doing QA testing as a freelance job. And I was on a website where they had a video that immediately starts flashing. So I tagged, I like marked it as an issue, at least with the EU regulations. And but also just like if you had a headache that day and you're scrolling and that happens, right? Like kids, the original reason for that guideline was for people who are photosensitive and could have a seizure. Also, maybe you have a headache. Maybe like there's a whole range of things just like that apply. Another one is that I talk about a lot in my trainings is that as a parent, that first year after my kid was born, I was using my phone with one hand. I only have one hand available. If I can't use it with one hand, it's not happening. If there aren't captions there, it's not happening. So, like, if I'm on TikTok, a lot of moms, a lot of parents are scrolling after their kid falls asleep. I'm not turning the volume on. I'm only watching the caption videos. I say this all the time. If you don't have captions, I'm not watching it because the audio is off. So those are all kind of examples of how it's, helpful for a lot of people.
Definitely. Anyone else?
So UDL was actually my dissertation topic, and I think, I guess to summarize the importance of it and how I use it as an instructional designer on campus, the biggest thing is to help save time for students. So, if a student needs accommodations for something, or, they may have a learning barrier and not even realize it or not report it to their institution, that still doesn't mean that as designers, faculty, or whoever, that we shouldn't design with that in mind because we know, like, it doesn't even have to be a learning disability. It could be, like Laura said, a mom who, finally got the baby go to sleep and wants to just check out Instagram. So I think it's important to be proactive instead of reactive through UDL and go ahead and make sure that those captions are available. Make sure that, there's a transcript for videos and that, there's alt text for all the images. That way students don't have to go back and wait for someone to fix things or get them the information that they need. And also, another big thing about UDL that I realize is important from my research is that it really also boils down to trying to make sure that students feel confident in their ability to learn, basically. So one of the things that I try to do with with my instructional design work is to encourage faculty to offer a variety of ways to do an assignment. So for instance, I was working with faculty for a writing assignment. And of course, the final project is typically a portfolio where you collect all of your writing materials and give a summary of what you learned. So we came up with some ideas and decided, instead of just writing a 2-page paper to reflect on the semester, also, if they want to create a brochure or do a podcast episode or do a video, and all of that kind of helps the student as an individual be able to pick things that they feel confident in and also that they're interested in. And I also try to not only design with accessibility in mind, but also professional development for the future. So if a student is, I don't know, maybe they want to be the next big podcaster or the next Oprah, like they have that information that they can use or that content that they can use for an online portfolio or for a future interview down the line. So I try to think about that as well.
And I'll add on to that. So imagine that you're using captioning, but say that I'm an instructor and I'm doing a demonstration simultaneously. Now imagine that, everybody processes information differently. So whether you have a disability or you don't, that you're aware of, every human being is going to process information at different rates. Now imagine that you happen to be deaf or not. When we talk about universal design in a presentation way, so rather in the classroom or online, one thing that I always encourage people, which I wish was evangelized more than it is that to pace yourself. So for example, say that I was doing a demo and I'm going to be sharing slides with you. Imagine that you're reliant on captions and you have to follow the demo that I'm showing you simultaneously. By the time you read the captions and we've moved on, you've already missed the slides. So you're not benefiting. So captioning alone does not create, it doesn't bridge the access gap. So that alone doesn't solve everything. So the pacing of information is just as important as a foundational principle for universal design principles than anything else. So if I'm going to show you something, maybe, and even for like low vision and blind, or somebody who may be deaf, or just someone that processes information differently, or even for people where English is not their first language and they're thinking in a different language. And now with today's technology, I could have live captioning in my native language, but I still have to process all of these visual dynamics. So if I'm, so it's always good to think about the pacing of things. So I'll give you an example. Say that I'm going to do a demo on, putting code into a website and the changes that will occur. So I'm not helping anybody if I'm talking about it and demoing simultaneously, because you have to watch the captions or an ASL interpreter, and you have to watch the slide simultaneously. That's not going to happen. So my pacing has already made it inaccessible for you. So it's always good. And then if you want to like add inclusivity to people that are low vision or blind, I can also go ahead and describe what I'm going to be showing you. So I'm going to be like, okay, now I'm going to show you a slide of blah, 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 and it's going to look like this. And then I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to show the slide and I'm going to pause so you can take it in visually. That's optimal universal design. Captions alone, alt text alone doesn't solve everything. Yes, it helps. And having a transcription that people can go back and refer to is also a beautiful addition. But if you're doing webinars, you're doing live presentations, pacing is a very important principle in that.
Definitely. And I really like how y'all all talk about like something that is like an accommodation for accessibility turning into like a normal everyday thing. Like so many like things that we use every day are as a result of that. Like this isn't digital, but like electric toothbrushes, like those were an accommodation that turned into a normal everyday thing. So I really like that you want to talk about that. All right. So our next question is, what is your process for including people with disabilities in user research, usability testing, and quality assurance to identify and fix accessibility barriers in your products and platforms?
I'll be honest, that's something that I wish I could get more experience in because I don't get a chance to work with students as much as I'd like to. My work is more designing for the student, but I don't get a chance to actually get that face time with them or even feedback because once I design a course and give it to the faculty to share for their class, whatever feedback they get at the end of the year goes to them. And it's not always, um, we don't always get that feedback unless the faculty takes the time to say, hey, this is what I got in my evaluation. So that's actually something that I would like to figure out how to change and would be open to any suggestions from anyone here. But in the meantime, though, one thing I do try to do is actually use the screen readers and different things, different tools because I actually tested out something that I was working on a couple weeks ago and realized that I think it's right here on my browser. It's called Read Aloud, and it's just like a plugin that you can add to your web browser. And I was testing something out and realized some content that was in a drop down menu, it skipped it completely because I wanted to hear how it would sound. So, even though I'm not able to get direct feedback from students, I try to at least use what they're using to see what their experience would be like.
Sorry. So half of my job is that so our our center is faculty and staff facing. But I was originally in an IT support role, and that's how I ended up in this role because when we would be doing IT support for like Canvas, which is our learning management system, we would occasionally have students, faculty, staff with learning disabilities. And so we were supporting them. And when I moved into this role now, it is very much whoever emails someone who emails me and they have a problem. So it's sort of the user is the person with the disability, and then we're working backwards. So um, we're often doing sort of these ad hoc, like who has the training, who has the resources. We've had most recently we had a success that we met with so we had a faculty member who suddenly lost her hearing. There's a word for it. I can't remember it. Halfway through a semester. She is in a very, like a lot of America, but especially Pittsburgh, there's a lot of old buildings. This is a very old building. It is all cement. It is all concrete. There is no, yeah, there's no carpeting, so not only did she find herself without hearing, but even once she got hearing aids and they were still figuring it out, the noises are bouncing around and she was going to quit her job. She went asking for accommodations and they suggested captioning and that just wasn't going to work. But then her son decided he wanted to go to Pitt. So fortunately, someone in her center redirected her to us and we met with her. So it was me and one of the people who is in our classroom design on our classroom design team. And at this point, she had cochlear implants, which there isn't a lot of research for people who are older. Usually, this is something kids have put in, and then um, they learn how to adjust with it. So she was still learning that. There wasn't a lot of research. She wanted to be able to continue teaching. So we sat down with her in this room. And just from personal experience with friends, family who have hearing aids, I said, well, the first thing I noticed is like, there's no carpeting, like you go into a noisy restaurant now that's all like this open space, modern bistro design. There's nothing to absorb that sound. So you're just yelling at each other over dinner, over overpriced hamburger. So I said, what if we put in something to absorb the noise so it's not bouncing around? She was like, that would be great. I explained this restaurant thing. She said, yes, I have noticed that too. So our first thing was to look for noise absorbing panels, sound absorbing panels. And me and the classroom design person, we're both sort of in this like things come at us and you figure it out. So we're not professionals in this. It's just whatever we know and then looking it up. So we asked her like, would you want this? Would you want this? What about this? We worked together with her. She can now, and then one of the big things I noticed when I took on this role was that you cannot do it alone and you need alliances with as many people as possible. One of the first things I did when I moved into this role was I I got myself some new clothes. I'd been working at home for 4 years. I was like, and I was postpartum. I was like, I've got to leave my office and start meeting people face to face, at their offices for lunch, for coffee, because the real goal here is to have as many resources as possible. So, one of the relationships we'd built, sort of just like we'd met with them once or twice, was with TechAl. So, every state in America has this funding for assistive technology. In Pennsylvania, they're in Philadelphia at Temple University. So, we reached out to them and she had to be the one to go and sign up, but she'd said she'd heard of the Roger pen. She thought she'd like to try a couple different things. They said they had it. They shipped it to us. So we did that. And then the classroom design guy, Chase, whose name is Chase, he had originally worked in our AV unit, which was great because he had to figure out the connection between the cochlear implant and the Roger pen. There were like different wires. I was just very grateful I did not have to deal with that part because wires and cords aren't my thing. So that was something we had to figure out. But the Roger pen has made it possible for her to teach. There was a moment we thought she would have to return it because somebody had requested it, and we were really scrambling because we're halfway through the semester. She said, this is the only way I've been able to teach. Fortunately, whoever it was that wanted it canceled their request. And Tech Owl is about to buy a new one, so they're letting us keep this one for good, which is amazing. But it was a moment where you're working with the person, but they also aren't sure exactly what they need. Like, I need to be able to hear. The only thing we can't fix is that I guess, so Pitt has a lot of hospitals around there. Our health sciences are really big. So when the life flight flights go over, I guess it interrupts her cochlear implant. So she just has to pause class and be like, I need a minute. We can't figure that one out. But this was a moment where there was a group of us sitting down and saying, what can we do? What do you want? But also just relying on someone to be like, here's how to fix it isn't always feasible. It's just, it was a lot of like, hey, I found this, I found that. I think this could work. Let's try it out. I think it's about being somebody who's like, you got to be flexible with this and be willing to go a couple different ways. And we were just like, let's just see what works. So it's worked out, but it did require, working with her, working with the administrative person who has to get all of this paid for, working with now more limited budgets, working with external groups who you need to build those relationships with. Um, and it was a success. But if we hadn't built that relationship with Tech Owl, if they hadn't known to come to us, like there were a lot of things that had to happen. So streamlining and building those relationships, even if it's just once over Zoom, I don't think I talked to them in a year, but I knew they were there. I knew how to get in touch with them. I knew the basic process. Those are all part of like bringing something together to work. You're not going to do it on your own. And the user doesn't always know what's going to fix it. They just know, hey, like she just lost her hearing all of a sudden at 40 something. Like this is very new to her. They're still figuring it all out. So we even had to call her husband at one point. She didn't remember something she had and like which one is it? And he knew. So that's kind of a scenario where there's a lot of parts that go into it.
I think Laura shared a very important message that all of you can take forward with your life, which is that you're not going to know the answer to everything. So it's okay to not know what you don't know as long as you're intentional about reaching out and not being afraid to ask for help or if you have questions. And by reaching out to, you know, the community. I mean, now we're in a digital world where, previous generations would not have been so easily this type of information or very specialized skill information. If you didn't have that experience or knowledge, you wouldn't have had access to it so easily. Now in today's world, there's so many like state agencies that reside in almost every county across the US. It would be virtually impossible to not get answers to some questions or at least to receive some level of resource knowledge within these areas. So, and just because you're working with a deaf person or a dyslexic person or a neurodiverse person or a blind person or a paraplegic or whatever categories a human being falls in, um, doesn't mean that what works for them is going to work for everyone with the exact same diagnosis. So every disability has a spectrum. It's not a homogenized one size fits all. Just because you have this diagnosis doesn't mean that what works for you will work with the exact same person with that kind of diagnosis. They may require something very vastly different. I'll give you an example. My son, who's now 21 and he's at university, he's orally deaf. And so the accommodations that he needs is different than maybe another person with severe hearing loss in what they require. So just keep that in mind, but good points.
Definitely. I think when it comes to accessibility, it's a lot of like, does this work? Does this not work? What do you think you need? What do you not think you need? Or what if we put this in front of someone else? It's a lot of like kind of trial and error. But using those resources and connecting with people around you is definitely the way to go. All right. What is your formal process or recommended best practices for managing disability-related workplace accommodations for IT and digital professionals, especially for those that are not immediately visible?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't
Yeah.
quite get all.
What's your formal process or recommended best practice for managing disability-related workplace accommodations for IT and digital professionals? I'm trying to think of a different way to phrase that so it's a little bit more understandable. For those with disabilities, are there specific workplace accommodations that have helped you in the past or helped people around you in the past that you think would be good to share?
Yeah, this is part of the ad hoc part of my job. We occasionally have people who are, so I'm staff facing, so staff and faculty. So that's who I usually work with. Um, there's sort of two scenarios that happen. Well, even with our students, this happens. Actually, it happens more with our students. Some of them come to college knowing exactly what they would need. They've used it at home, they know what works, it's still running on their mom's computer, whatever. And they'll just say, hey, I need this version of blah, 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 and we get it for them. Great. There's the second scenario where they don't register when they should. And the teachers do their best to encourage students, but the students will maybe think, I can handle it without XYZ. And then it doesn't go well. Their quiz doesn't go well, whatever. So then we're kind of scrambling to get them what they need. Sometimes staff also need things, and sometimes they know what they need, sometimes they don't. So it could be that they've realized that this new software would help them, and it's assistive tech. They don't have the training. And this is something we're working on. So either I try to provide it, we do have an informal, unpaid relationship with UPMC Center for Assistive Technology. So for a couple $100, they can go over there. I know the people there, and I will send them over. Depends what kind of disability they have. If you go through the Office of Vocational Rehab, then like whatever state funding will pay for you to get that consultation. But there's a lot of things that come into this. Like you're gonna have to teach yourself. Like I will send documentation and training videos, or I will say, for more experience, I'll put you in touch with the Center for Assistive Technology. Some people do really well. Some people need more hands-on support, which is when I say, like I'm one person. I think you should just like sort of cough up the money and go to CAT because they're amazing. They're some of the best in the country. It's going to require a little more self-advocacy and also sort of like, you're not on your own, but you do have to do the things necessary, which are pretty tedious or time consuming. But as a student, you may have more support than you will. But what a boss really wants to hear is, here's the solution I need. Here's how much it'll cost. I can get the training this way or that way. I'm working on it, and this will solve the problem. And usually, I think that works out pretty well, for the most.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question?
I have not experienced that much, though. But I think the main thing, or anytime I do get anything specific for accommodations, is for math. Because I think math is very, very complicated to develop, additional support for because of all the equations and things like that. So I'm always trying to find new ways to make that easier for students who need additional support.
Definitely. I definitely struggle with math. I have dyscalculia, which is dyslexia, but with numbers. So, and I've worked with a lot of students who have that as well. So it's a lot of like trial and error, figuring out what makes the numbers work best for them as well. All right. So a couple of you, Paris and Laura, talked about your accessibility checkers. We're gonna go a little bit more into that. How do you regularly audit your digital products for accessibility, and what specific metrics or tools do you use to measure compliance and track improvement over time?
I was gonna let Paris go first, but all right. So, if you're at a university right now, audit and compliance is huge because we're trying to prepare for this 2026-2027 deadline. My friend at work has a joke that I just need a t-shirt that says, "Are you ready for the audit?" Um, and I've been using this audit as a way to get things through that otherwise may not have happened. When you say audit at a corporation or a university, things happen much faster than like, we should just do this. But when you're like, we'll be audited and we'll fail the audit, they're like taking notes and like, who do I contact? I'm like, yes. So I just bring up the audit every time I need something. Um, yeah, so the university has a license to site improve for the websites. I don't do a lot of the marketing stuff. I am going to go through our center's website to make sure we're ready because I don't think we are. And then in my trainings, I always suggest color contrast analyzer. It's free and it's the one that the trusted tester training through the Department of Homeland Security, which I don't know why it falls under them, but I'm sort of glad it does because they're more likely to get funding in emergency situations. It's free. I try to suggest the things that are free, the extensions, the things that may help you. So, like if you want to become a QA tester in the future or accessibility tester, these are things you're going to use. Learning how to use them is going to help you later. Accessibility checkers, QA testers, they make pretty good money. And so I do some QA on the side, and uh, I always put that this will fail EU regulations, which does get you paid as a bug. So I, I'm usually just teaching tools in Canvas. We have something called You Do It, and we're trying to get a higher adoption rate on this. But yeah, you start there. I'm probably going to do some more webinars about You Do It. We don't have high enrollment and we're in a tough place because we're federally funded. We fall under DEI. So I am actually putting together, my center started putting together a prompt library to work with the AI thing. And I was going to put together a list of prompts that will help me audit our website faster. There are ways to do that. Um, the IAAP has some really good trainings on using AI. And instead of just saying use AI or AI is good, AI is bad, no, this is how you use it. These are some prompts that work really well. So I was going to make a list this week of the prompts I've discovered through trainings or that I've come up with or whatever. And I'm going to run those first before I do any manual checking. I'm not even going to run the wave extension or anything. I'm going to run our prompts on it first. Hopefully that helps to get me through a bunch of it because given that we don't have the budget we thought we would have, every center and department, school is sort of on their own. They're supposed to have a team. We have a team of three. It's our marketing guy, our website guy, and me. So we have a lot of web pages because we provide documentation and guidance and writing. Like we're always creating this. So yeah, Pitt is definitely in this situation with a lot of others. We wanted to use the what is it? Read Speaker, I believe. There's an integration for Canvas. Was it Read Speaker, Read Aloud? One of them. It works really well with the quizzes, but it was just past our budget, just way past. It was like 30,000 a year. And so we've been working with the Center for Assistive Technology to figure out other ways we can work around some of the issues we're having. We've talked to Be My Eyes. They have a new thing called Be My AI, which is another thing we're kind of looking at. They were much more affordable, but they're not made for Canvas, which is a thing we're trying to figure out. Our accessibility coordinator yesterday said our focuses should be like our websites and our Canvas courses. So we're sort of trying to prioritize like where do we start? We do department trainings, but this is one of our biggest challenges facing us right now.
So I was trying to think of some things, but Laura, I think you covered most of it. So we do some of the same things. And we may have to keep in touch on ways to get the whole audit thing to be reinforced because that's something that I'm working on. So in addition to being an instructional designer, I'm also co-chair of our digital working accessibility group. So, and we are in the process of trying to come up with a proposal to do a required training for faculty and staff on campus in preparation for the big, change next year. So, I've been, working on some content for that. But one of the things that I'd really like to incorporate is students into that somehow. And I think that um, in order to I think in order to get people to understand how important accessibility is, you kind of have to pull at their heartstrings a little bit. And because I feel like, at least from my experience in work, doing accessibility work over the last few years, it seems like a lot of people, you won't get a lot of buy-in unless they know someone or they've experienced it themselves or they've needed an accommodation, they've needed support. So, I would like to, and for any of the, students or, who are here, if you are interested in, partnering with, because I'm trying to come up with a campus-wide challenge to get, reinforce the principles of accessibility, and also maybe try, hopefully try to do some videos with students just to kind of showcase each of those principles and just come up with more ways to promote it across campus. So definitely, if you're interested in that, keep me in mind and reach out because this is like number one priority right now.
So one of the things that gets talked about in the accessibility world a lot is the fact that these digital accessibility classes, this is a career that like you move up, you can make six figures in the high six figures. So the fact that it's not taught in computer science classes, so I have a degree in multimedia development. I have a certificate in information systems design, and only once in all of those classes did a web design teacher in an intro class talk about alt text. He just said, "Oh yeah, it's good for disabilities." Didn't go past that. I had no idea about accessibility until I started talking to clients and well, yeah, we call them clients. They're not customers. Boss is like, if they're ever customers, we need to have a different talk. Um, Clients, and then I'd also been given, we all had these like other things we were supposed to teach about, other software systems. We got voluntold when you started the job, like this is going to be your new thing. It was, and so one of them was accessibility, and I didn't know anything about it. I attended my boss's first training about it, and I was like, okay. And then fortunately, I had this because once I started getting these clients when we were remote, I could say, well, there's a thing called like a screen reader or text to speech. Have you ever thought about using this? Have you ever heard of it? No, they never heard of it. And that's been a big thing is that a lot of people try to hide these disabilities, especially faculty who are afraid it'll hurt their career. And the thing they don't know is that one, if they were to get registered, if they went to their doctor and then they got registered, they have that legal protection, but also the license would get paid for by the department and then they would be able to listen. And I'm pretty sure most of the people I talked to who had been trying to hide it went on to get some sort of software. But they don't even know it exists. So that's part of the first problem. But yeah, they should be talking about digital accessibility in computer programming classes. I tried to reach out to some computer science people I knew to be like, hey, we're having these events, and didn't really get a lot of uptake. But I've thought about even trying to teach a class at some point in our information science school about it because it's like this is a legitimate career. There's, when the government is functioning, there's always federal contractors who are hiring people. Pay is pretty good. Like it's a decent middle class job if you're certified and everything.
Just to add to that, over 90% of the human population has sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Over 90% of people with a disability are not visible. So rather it's disclosed or not, it always blows me away that when people think about disability, they automatically have like images in their mind of like, a visually impaired person maybe using a cane, or a sighted dog, or someone using American Sign Language, or someone in a wheelchair. And that's just not necessarily true for the majority of people with a disability. Just like, Caroline mentioned, discovering her own, dynamics and diagnosis. And also, when we talk about, you know, um, having to make the case and justifying to larger institutions or to companies why this matters. I mean, I've always found it very absurd because every human being at some point in their life will experience a disability. As part of the human experience through this life, everybody is one breath away of being a member of that community. And it is so arrogant to go through, you know, go through society, go through work, go through careers, go through relationships with the assumption that this is an otherness versus, because we're all in the waiting room to join that. It's the one dichotomy or the one community that every single one of us, regardless of religion, regardless of region, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of all of these things, that is the one community that all of us will, ascribe to at some point, in some way, shape, or form. Rather it's breaking a hand, rather it's becoming, suddenly blind, or suddenly deaf, or suddenly you can't walk, or suddenly there's so many things. And then you're going to become very humble in realizing, oh, these things really do matter. So it's not, it just always boggles me why why you have to even make the case that like having these measures in place matter. So just saying.
Definitely. Um, so we have about 7 minutes left, so I'm not gonna ask like one of our bigger questions. So to kind of end us off, if you guys have any pieces of advice or tips regarding digital accessibility, now is your chance to share them.
I would kind of wrap up with kind of how I started in the beginning, talking about training. Um, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your name again? Shireen? Is it Shireen? Okay, so I love how earlier when you mentioned alt text and you were saying like, are you all familiar with that? I'm just going to tell you, like I feel like with accessibility, you should always try to find opportunities to share what it's about because for people who are passionate about it, you may be surprised that there are so many people who are just don't have the knowledge of it. So any opportunity you can get to share the information with someone, it's helpful. Anytime you can learn something yourself, take that opportunity as well. Even with all of the work that I've been doing, I just got back from a conference and I attended a session on alt text. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to this session because I want to meet the person who was presenting. And real, I already know about alt text, but I'm going to go so I can meet her because she wrote a lot of research articles that I used for my dissertation. And I learned so much just in that 30-minute session that I didn't expect to learn. So keep learning and keep doing what you can to support others as well as yourself. So that's, important as well. So yeah.
Um, I would say that this job has been really great for me as someone who's the ADHD because I can hyper focus on things interested in. I get to info dump on people a lot and they have to listen for 40 minutes. This like huge bank of knowledge I have in my head finally is like a career. And I don't have to do rote administrative tasks, which I used to. I used to be like an office admin and stuff. If you have ADD or anything where like you don't want to be doing the same thing every day, anything where you're in sort of like a support role that is not keeping someone's calendar, you're probably going to enjoy, and something where you're learning new things that you're interested in. Um, Also is going to be a good fit. So, fit for like your strengths is really important for jobs because, you know, um, I bop around from interest to interest, but it's allowed me to also like have ideas and solutions that I actually get to implement. When you're an administrative whatever, they don't care about your newest big idea. They want to make sure that you like have their schedule up to date and their travel plans are organized. Like they don't want to hear your crazy new idea. They're like, that's nice for you, but that's not your job. Caroline, you were talking about dyscalculia. So this week I am actually submitting a proposal to give a training on using AI for dyscalculia. I started working on this a year or two ago. Originally, it was going to be a training about accessibility, digital accessibility, and neurodivergence. And then I can't remember if I didn't give myself enough time to prepare or if I just sort of had this idea at the last minute. It was maybe both at the same time. So I think I don't remember what happened. Either way, I decided to focus in past just saying neurodivergent for this training. And I looked it up, and I have dyscalculia, and there's not a lot of support there. I looked it up, and dyscalculia fit under this neurodivergent title, which, whatever. Um, that said, I'd already submitted this proposal with neurodivergent in it. So some people loved it and were like, hey, I actually am a math teacher. I'm going to use this. Other reviews were like, this isn't really what I thought I was going for. I'm like, that's fair. That is a fair critique. But my association has certification requirements that fall into three buckets. So there's professional development, which is just learning, training. There's sharing your knowledge, which is giving webinars that are not part of your day job. I did not read the fine print about this. I just realized in the last 6 months that a lot of what I thought would cover my continuing education credits doesn't. But you can get a lot of continuing education credits by giving webinars for the association. The only scary thing about that is it's your peers. So it's not just people who've never heard of accessibility, it's the people in your field. So I have avoided it for as long as I could because I was like, oh, these are the experts. I don't want to get anything wrong in front of them. But finally, this both need for continuing education credits and this idea I'd had converged. So I actually went to my friend who works on our pedagogy team in our center, and I said, "Look, I need some help getting this proposal together." The last time had some mixed reviews. But I think there is a lot of space for AI helping the math teachers give assignments that provide support for the students with dyscalculia. For example, we're running out of time, but for example, you can simply have ChatGPT create more spaces between each numeral. So if you've ever read the routing number in your bank, it's like a 000, and I have to cover it with as I go through the zeros with my finger. And I read in the WCAG guidelines for dyscalculia, the more space between the numbers, the easier it is for someone with dyscalculia. So in my training, I said, if you just go into ChatGPT, you say, these are the algorithms, this is blah, blah, blah. Please put like 2 or 3 spaces between each numeral. It can spit it out for a teacher who is otherwise just totally overwhelmed with work and everything. Little things like that you can use AI for. Copilot will help you in Excel. Now, Microsoft is talking about, so I went to some Copilot trainings because we had a request for a Copilot training, and I was like, sure, I'll do it. When they got to the Excel part, it was to show like, oh, look what it can do with all this data. You don't have to know. Blah, blah. I was like, I get my numbers mixed up all the time, and I can't remember like I did do data analysis at one point. I did used to know that all the different things you needed. I do not remember most of them now. But I realized that for someone with dyscalculia, especially someone in an office job, like the one I used to have, this could be amazing. It could also be good for college students who are in more quantitative classes where they might be struggling, just giving them some tools to use Excel because they could be smart enough to be getting through this class, but they're, reversing 46 and 64 and their grade is at a C minus. Ask me how I know. So I think there's a lot of room in this. So they're going to help me get this training and this proposal together. So that'll be sometime in the next year. But yeah, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. Like you come up with an idea and instead of your boss being like, that's great. Did you submit my travel expenses? My boss is like, yeah, go for it. Do what you need to do, which is awesome. There aren't a lot of jobs where you get to do that.
All right, we're out of time, but Shireen, if you have anything to say, we'll give your last thoughts and then we'll head out.
Well, as someone that is in the trenches and very up close and personal with the disability community, I'm just very, very happy that these conversations are happening, and I'm glad that Paris and Laura and you and everybody in the audience is engaging in these very valuable conversations. And I hope that everyone, is just soaking this in. And I want to say that all of you are more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or any additional thoughts, or, just want to talk, I'm a very accessible person. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I'm just glad that this conversation is happening. So thank you for setting this up. It makes me feel very motivated and hopeful for the future.
Thank you, and I plan on having many more of these conversations because they're so important. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you had a great time at the panel. Thank you to Paris, Shireen, and Laura for being such amazing panelists and for engaging us in this amazing conversation. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.